Hey guys, when it comes to free-to-play monetization, sales and merchandising is actually one of the most impactful ways that you can help increase the monetization potential for your games. At the Vancouver GPM Forum, the Games Product Managers Forum, I gave a talk on my thoughts with respect to best practices, what are the latest approaches and techniques, as well as my own framework for how you should be thinking about sales and merchandising to break it down and to try and improve how you build a sales and merchandising infrastructure for your game. So without further ado, I'll take you to my talk in Vancouver right now. The presentation I want to give today is about free-to-play sales and merchandising. And just to give you guys some context, this is an area that I've been studying and I'm starting to dig into. I haven't completely figured it out yet, so it could be a very interactive session, but definitely interested to see where you guys are in terms of your perspectives in terms of how to develop best-in-class sales and merchandising practices. And just to give you guys a little bit more background in terms of myself, so if any of you read The Deconstructor of Fun, there's also a podcast. I'm one of the hosts on that podcast. Over the last 4 years, I've been in mobile game publishing at NBC Universal and Sega. Prior to that, I was at a dev studio called Fun Plus, where I worked on a game called King of Avalon. And before that, I ran my own dev studio. But currently, I am trying to be a YouTuber. So I have a YouTube channel called Game Makers. If you guys haven't checked it out, please check it out. And I'm also currently trying to found a new mobile game dev studio. So we'll see how that goes, but that's me. So I wanted to first talk about why is sales and merchandising so important. And so these are just some quotes by a few people that I have worked with in the past. But with one dev studio, that basically implemented bundle sales, they were quite surprised when they said, wow, I couldn't believe it. Implementing bundle sales increased revenue by 30%. Another dev studio that I worked with implemented actually a machine learning type of algorithm where they looked at the time between offering different types of offers and then the amount, like the actual IAP size, to offer on a per user individual basis, and that increased LTV by 30%. And then finally, there is a mobile game publisher who is actually one of the more successful game publishers that is in the market today. And when I looked at what they were doing, there are a lot of mobile game publishers that try to compete on user acquisition, but this was a mobile game publisher that was getting more of their impact and performance actually through sales and merchandising rather than through user acquisition. And the other point I wanted to make is that sales and merchandising, I think, is a very important aspect of what I believe is required to be successful in free-to-play. One of the things that I tell a lot of developers that I work with is this notion that the game is not the game in free-to-play. And what I mean by that is that the game is just the top of the iceberg. That especially in the most competitive categories, especially something like Match 3, for example, you not only have to have the game, but you have to have all of this infrastructure underneath to be successful. You have to have sales and merchandising, budgeting optimization. You have to have great admon optimization, as IronSource can help you guys out with, live ops automation. There's a lot of stuff that's required to be successful besides just the game itself. And today, the aspect that I want to focus on is the sales and merchandising aspect. And this is just another slide that talks about the time that we're in. So in 2015, I think it was very possible to have a hit game if you had a good product, if you had capable UA, and if you had a decent live ops team. But again, in today's market, in 2019, the market has evolved. And so what it takes to be successful today, and especially for the most competitive categories, is you actually need a great product. You need advanced sales and merchandising, which we're going to talk about. You need this pretty deep technical infrastructure. You need great live ops. And increasingly, you need your UA and PM teams to work more closely together to drive competitive advantage. And so just in terms of what does it mean, and again, going back to this point about why is sales and merchandising so important, I don't know if many of you guys are familiar with the story of Game of War versus Kingdoms of Camelot. But, there's a much, when we're out to drinks tonight, I can tell you the full story, but which is a lot more colorful, a lot more interesting. But one of the key things that Machine Zone did is, Machine Zone basically copied Kings of Camelot for the most part, except the CEO at the time and one of their systems designers actually went to China and studied 3 particular Chinese games, War Tomb being one of them, and they copied a lot of the monetization mechanics, VIP in particular, and some other mechanics. And the impact of that was to drive a difference in terms of the LTV of the games. And so Kingdoms of Camelot at the time had an LTV of about $8 to $10. And also at that time, Game of War, based upon adding those additional features, was able to drive over $12 in LTV. Now, what is the impact of that difference was pretty huge, right? Like, Game of War literally just destroyed Kingdoms of Camelot, took up all the ad inventory in the market, and was able to basically control the market. And so I wanted to stress the importance of having this kind of, building out this kind of technical infrastructure, having best practices in sales and merchandising, because if you can drive that 30% difference relative to competitive products, this is what you could potentially do to your competitors. Okay, and so now I want to talk about my framework for sales. And again, this is just the way I think about it. And I'm going to be talking about a lot of this stuff at a high level. And if we have time, we can try and go into more depth. But again, definitely want to open it up to other people here. If you disagree with me or if you have questions, please interrupt me. But the framework for sales that I have, I call TTO. And what I mean by TTO is essentially breaking down sales into 3 components. The first is about targeting. In other words, who to target with different kinds of sales. The second is about timing, which is about when to offer sales to these different types of users. And finally, the offers themselves. And what do I mean by the offers? By offers, I mean the pricing, the sales amount, the IP size, and the creatives used to drive those offers. So I want to talk about each of these in turn. So with respect to targeting, targeting is inherently about segments, right? And so when you think about your user base, you jump back over here, you want to create different segments to target with different kinds of offers and potentially, again, with different types of timing. And so in terms of how we think about the segments, they should have specific types of similarity with respect to action, right? They should react similarly to an offer. In terms of value, like those specific segments should provide similar value from whether it's a profitability perspective or an LTV perspective or a conversion perspective. And finally, in terms of the needs, they should have the same needs or behave in similar ways. The segment should also be tractable. So I'm going to move back over here because that speaker is kind of screwing up my ear. So in order for you to have a tractable number of segments that you can actually do stuff with, I would recommend you have maybe like 5 or 6 different segments and not like 30. And then the final notion with respect to segments is to make sure that these segments are MECE. And what I mean by that is mutually exclusive and comprehensively exhaustive, meaning that you're not leaving specific groups out. You're not combining, like one user should be in one group and not in multiple groups, for example. And there shouldn't be people left out of your segmentation. And in terms of segmentation, from my perspective, there's 3 primary ways of doing segmentation. The first is the most common way, which is demographic. In other words, meaning profiles based on a population. So things like age, gender, location, education, income. And the types of sources or the way that you do demographic analysis are typically things like using Facebook Audience Insights, Google Trends, or something like Sensor Tower or App Annie. And typically, the cost to doing demographic analysis is pretty cheap, right? Like, besides maybe paying for like Sensor Tower App Annie, it's pretty easy to do, pretty fast to do. The second type of segmentation is psychographic, meaning that you're trying to build psychological profiles of different kinds of players that play your game. And this type of research is actually, at least from my experience, is done through specialized in-house researchers or specialized research firms. And this type of analysis is generally the most expensive type. And then finally, there is behavioral, meaning segmentation based on specific types of user behavior. And in my experience, I've experienced kind of 5 types of behavioral type of segmentation. The first is this notion of VIP or regulars. The second is RFM. The third is k-means clustering. Then there's sequential pattern mining, and then machine learning. And this is kind of in between kind of demographic and psychographic segmentation in terms of cost. Okay, so just wanted to go over like an example of psychographic analysis. So what does this mean? And so this is a personas sort of segmentation that was developed by a research firm called Liquid and Grit. For those of you that don't know about Liquid and Grit, they cover like slots, casino, puzzle games. But as you can see here, what you're really trying to do with personas is trying to understand the type of player and to bucket the types of players in your game and basically create like a psychological profile of who the player is and how they would play in your game. So this is an example. And then, now I've got a question for you guys. So assuming we do that, just a question in terms of, for you in the audience, so how many of you guys here do persona analysis or psychographic segmentation? And then how do you guys use them? Is there anyone here who does do that? Josh? Could you talk about how you use it?
How we use it right now is just identifying the different player groups in our one game based on player surveys.
Okay.
And match that up with analytical data.
Okay.
And then how we use it right now is just mainly on the acquiring more people for those different segments in user acquisition, but we don't get a lot for different offers or anything like that.
Okay. So are you building those psychographic profiles to try to determine who to acquire or for features in the game, or just so I have a better understanding of how you're using it?
Ideally for all of that.
Okay.
Since we're all friends here and honest,
Yeah.
it's really hard to nail down those groups.
Right.
But now that we do have those groups, and now we're going to use that for A/B testing for features on it. But collecting that, figuring out what those buckets are, I'd say is the hardest part.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing about psychographic analysis is that it's a lot of art as opposed to just straight up data science and pure analysis. So from my perspective, the way that I view how to use personas and psychographic segmentation is basically 3 kinds of applications. The first is ads. And so when I think about ads, I try to determine the personas of potential players. And so like, let's say we've got a game that we're launching, and I'm trying to find the best type of ads to create. Well, then I would try to find themes to attract those specific player types and then generate creatives around those themes. And I'll provide an example in the next slide. But that's one application. The second application is around product features. And so in this case, if you can determine personas of current players, then basically what I would try to then do is, based on that psychographic profile, to size the persona segments by whether it's the active players in your game or by revenue. And then if you understand the personas, those specific psychographic profiles in your games that are the most valuable to you, then you can start to optimize product features around those most valuable personas. So for example, if there is like a, social Sally in your game, then you would want to focus more on social features. Or if there is, angry Adam who's all about PvP, then you want to think about implementing more PvP or battle features, that kind of thing. And so again, the second type of applications with personas is around product features. And finally is around offers. And so in this case, we would try to create personas of player buyer types. So when you think about who are the types of players that are buying in your game and what is the reason they're buying, then you would create a psychographic set of profiles around those buyers. You would then try to size a persona segments by revenue. And again, this is as much art as science. And then you would try to create optimized offers for each persona type, right? And then you can A/B test that and so on and so forth. Just speaking candidly, I think generally for me the biggest challenge has been trying to size the personas. Again, it's hard to then match which persona goes to which specific like player profile type or which buyer type. But I don't know if anyone, Josh, I don't know if you guys have a good way of sizing personas that you've come up with, but for me it's been surveys, yeah.
I can tell you the wrong
yeah.
way. Don't do a rewarded survey and then have it loaded into a Google spreadsheet.
Yeah.
That constantly just grows because then you're never going to be able to look at that data. I use a tool out there and I can look at the data. I don't know this.
Right. So, go ahead.
Yeah, there's something that Google Play did, which is actually they built personas on how people came to the game. And they found that was better than any demographic data or any other type of data for them.
Right.
So in other words, you sort of touched on it a little bit. So did Social Sally come to the game because her friends recommended and gave her peer pressure to come and play the game with them?
Right.
People who came straight from ads, for example, people who found it through search or browsing, separately, and those people actually have different behavior types, different behaviors themselves.
Right.
When they come into the game, so they're going to be more invested or less invested depending on how they found out about the game initially. So I thought it's pretty interesting because it's completely top of the funnel. Right.
Yeah. I think one other interesting thing for me is the way that I've done personas in the past is actually. For each of these application types, I've actually done it separately. So I haven't kept like the same persona type across the 3 different applications. But it'd be interesting to see if that works or not. Okay. So I wanted to give one example, which is for ads. And so, Archero is a game that I think everybody's talking about these days. And so as an example here, one of the things you could potentially do is try to, first start by thinking, who are the types of players that are likely to play this game? And then to try and, hypothesize types of players that would come in. And so we could start with Power Paul, who is basically someone who is going to be focused on power and big challenge. System Sam, which is somebody who's like an RPG fanatic and loves like the upgrading aspect, the RPG systems aspect of games. Action Adam, which is somebody who is very interested in having an arcade kind of very like quick twitch action type of gameplay. Roguelike Rick, one of the key differentiators of Archero is the roguelike nature of the game. And so to focus on that specific type of feature. And then finally, ARPG Andy, which is basically someone who's a Diablo fan and is looking for a lighter mobile version of Diablo. And so based on and again, this is just a quick kind of conceptual way of developing these personas, but then what can you do once you've developed these personas? Well, from a top of funnel perspective, from an ads perspective, we can then say, okay, for Power Paul, we're going to create this video ad where your character is just destroying mass number of guys, or there's a huge boss and you just take that boss down. For System Sam, we're going to create a number like ads that feature upgrading and different weapons and being able to equip your character with different types of armor, equipment, and things like that, and spells and things like that. For Action Adam, we're going to focus on the gameplay and showing the character move around very quickly and shoot stuff and making it like very fast and kind of fun, right? For Roguelike Rick, we're going to focus on this aspect of, okay, you completed a section or you defeated a boss. Now you get to pick different kinds of abilities. And again, that roguelike aspect. And for ARPG Andy, we're going to create a lot of creative that's focused around like making it feel or seem like Diablo, right? And so based on that, you've got these different themes that correspond to each of these personas, and then you basically just test them. And once you test them, you'd be like, okay, well, wait a minute, our roguelike Rick creatives aren't really working. Well, let's kill that. Our System Sam creatives aren't working, so let's forget about that. But the Power Paul creatives are performing really well, for example. Then you would just double down, triple down on what's working based on the themes that you come up with. Again, that all stems from first thinking about your players from a psychographic perspective first. Okay. Now I want to talk about, so that's psychographic. And I now wanted to talk about behavioral. And I'm basically just talking about this at a very high level. But there's a lot of detail here. But again, just wanted to talk about it high level, and then we can kind of see if any of you guys, well, first maybe I can ask, do any of you guys do behavioral segmentation today in your games?
We sure talk about it a lot.
Yeah, you talk about it a lot. Have you done anything?
Nothing.
Nothing currently. And
Yeah, we have some machine learning running in our games. As to the previous presentation, we started to implement dynamic rewards based on the user type, based on a bunch of criteria, so that the ads that they see will reward them differently. But that's not just random, that's based on their behaviors, how many videos they watch, and so on and so forth.
okay, so mainly what you're doing is you're looking at you're looking at user types, and based on the user type, you're modifying value exchange.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And there's way more than that. I think Gene runs the live ops, and we'll probably talk to him more. It's sort of in the weeds there with this stuff, so there's lots of different stuff there. I don't know if there's anything you want to share.
I was going to wait a little bit longer. I guess the question.
Don't wait.
It's always for me. It always comes down to the calendar, right, and the context of what else is going on. We're talking about in the game, selling stuff in the game, basically, right? And the calendar is always the context in which you're selling the stuff in. And so it's a lot of is for me. It's way more about how events and sales or sinks and sources interact. So it's about how do multiple sales that are going in the game interact with each other, as opposed to trying to do something in isolation. If you're doing something in isolation, it's really hard to do analysis on it. It really makes you're giving it context once you have to look at it in the calendar. Once you have to look at, for example, you're trying to sell something to somebody when you have when everybody's got a crap load of gold or virtual currency in the game. And you're like, why are my sales not working? You're not monitoring your gold levels properly, those types of things. It's that kind of stuff where I think you find success. It's much more about what else is happening as opposed to implementing something.
Okay, and the approach that you're using is more around machine learning? Is that on a...
Machine learning is a piece of it. We have a piece of technology that we use that, in fact, we do A/B tests where we compare a live ops designer running sales and comparing them against a piece of technology that we have, and does it automatically based on user behavior. And so usually what happens is we'll have particular sales where we leave a block available that basically allows this piece of technology to have added, right? And given a set of parameters around that, because it's always tricky when you use machine learning to figure out, well, how does this interact with the stuff that the live ops designers are doing? Right? Because that's going to overlap. Or also in machine learning, you got to teach them what's happening in the game. So if you have a particular event that's happening, that's going on, machine learning doesn't have necessarily enough time to learn, what it is that's happening. So in that type of situation, where you have, let's say, the release of a new hero in a game, machine learning takes a period of time to figure out what's the most optimal way to sell that hero. Whereas usually a designer will be able to figure that out immediately just based on gut feel.
Okay. So These are, from my understanding, the top 5 sorts of common methods of doing behavioral segmentation. But the first is this notion of VIP or regulars. There's actually a great talk by Jeff Howell. I think he was invited to this event. But if you do a search on regulars, Jeff Howell on YouTube, he talks about basically trying to, the high-level concept is trying to determine who are the most valuable and engaged players in your game. And generally speaking, you try to find those players that will comprise about 90% or more of the revenue in your game. And I think in Marvel Contest of Champions, their definition of a regular for their game was somebody that plays their game 6 out of 7 days, or 6 sequential days in a row, something like that. And so that's one way. There's another method called RFM, which stands for recency, which is like how recently did the player play. Frequency, which is activity level, and this could be a number of different metrics based on activity. It could be engagement. It could be, the number of times played since the beginning of since installing the app. But however you define frequency, and then monetary value, which for us in the free-to-play space would generally be LTV. And then you would put, and I'll give an example of this, but you put users into quintiles, and then you assess the different groups by some kind of score category. And k-means clustering is just like RFM, but what you do is you have sort of this RFM framework, so recency, frequency, monetary value, and then you map all of your users there, and then what k-means does is it tries to find clusters. It creates like a centroid and tries to find clusters of similar users. And then it'll identify what those groups look like. And finally, sequential pattern mining is basically, once you do, like, let's say you do like a regulars definition, or if you run RFM and you find your most valuable set of players, however you define your most valuable set of players, then either manually or programmatically, you would then map out, and I actually recommend you do this manually first, is you map out the entire sequence of activities and events that these players, your most valuable players, have experienced in your game. And so you just write exactly what they did, what events, all of the things that they did in the game that put them into this group of your most valuable players. You do that again and again and again and again and again until you find the patterns. That's sequential pattern mining. And finally, there's machine learning or linear programming. I'm sure you could speak to this a lot better than I can. I generally work with data scientists, and whether you're using like a genetic algorithm or whether you're using a random forest, or there's all sorts of different ways of attacking machine learning. But you would use machine learning to find the events or activities most predictive of conversion or maximizing monetization for an offer. But generally speaking, what you would do is for all the players, you would have a bunch of signals for that player, all the things that they did, all the things that characterize that player. And then through machine learning, it'll find the patterns of the things that are most predictive of what your goal is. So those are the methods that I am familiar with. If anyone is familiar with any other methods, please let me know. But just to explain RFM, so again, we talked about this notion of R, which stands for recency, F, which stands for frequency, and M, which stands for monetary value. And so you just put your players in terms of recency into quintiles. So you put them into 5 buckets. And you do the same thing for your players in terms of frequency, put them into 5 buckets, quintiles. And in terms of monetary value or LTV, same thing. So now you've got your players bucketed against 3 axes of recency, frequency, and monetary value. And then you just map them, right? And then you can call, like, your most valuable players would be like 5, 5, 5, right? And then once you map them, you can then look for interesting clusters of like, well, there's a cluster of players here, why? There's a cluster of players here, why? And then can you try and move players from one cluster to another, for example? And this is k-means. And basically, again, the same thing. So you have your RFM axis, but instead of putting them into quintiles, you just run k-means through whatever analytics package that you have. There's some analytics services that will do this for you as well. And then, again, it tries to create these centroids. It actually doesn't look like this. It looks more like for those of you that know what a centroid looks like, it tries to create best fit centroids around clusters of like players. And that is a k-means methodology. And so that is targeting. So again, as far as I know, in terms of how you do targeting, those are the different approaches that I have thought about that I'm trying to develop in terms of segmenting your player base so that they are targetable with different types of offers and timing. In terms of timing, the way that I think of timing is, well, before I do that, maybe I should ask you guys. So when should you send offers to your players? How do you know when they want them?
Send them to them.
So yeah, there's that approach. I call that the try approach, right? You kind of send stuff to players, see what happens. You try different patterns of when you send offers to players and see what, whatever patterns work the best, then you try to replicate that. The one limitation of that approach is you're basically assuming that your entire population will react the same unless you're doing that on a per segment basis. So that's certainly one way. Are there any other ideas of?
Use in-game events, like monitoring what players' events are, and then setting
Yep.
them off, and allow them to capitalize on something. Like, oh, they just got the character.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Another best practice, which is, events like Legendary is famous for this, right? You've got a really hardcore, very grindy event coming up, and so you send them an offer to help them get through that event.
The holiday roadmap, you're basically anything happening in the real world that you can wrap something around is particularly events and sales.
Yeah.
Halloween, Christmas, everything you can possibly think of. In the middle of summer, you have to invent something, that kind of thing.
For sure. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, calendar-based timing as well.
We don't do this very well. The Rise of Kingdoms is a great system where they have offers based on the user journey against different
Progression. Yep.
right? So the City of Hope is for building up the city, and
Right.
for heroes, and really, really well done, really thoroughly.
Right. Yeah, those are
Time offer too.
Sorry?
That's always a good thing for us. Is first time offer.
first time offer. That's right.
For you show it.
Yep.
And it's like 80% off.
Yeah, starter packs.
Maybe something that player can form a habit around so they actually log in to get the offer because they know it's coming. It's unpredictable.
Okay. What's an example of that?
Like a daily offer.
Oh, right, yeah.
Log in the first time you have the day you get an offer, right? So players always make sure to log in once every day. So
Got it. Okay, so like a scheduled type of offer that people can expect.
Josh, what's rolling hourly offers?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Those rolling hourly offers that you did last Black Friday.
Oh, yeah. So we did that. Although we tried to make that unpredictable because we didn't want players to know that it was on sale. So. But I didn't know that.
Go ahead.
In the case of The Walking Dead, we send them all the time, just not to. So we probably have hundreds, if not thousands, of trigger points for time brokers based on what players we set up.
Okay, it's trigger-based offers.
Absolutely.
Okay, got it. Right.
They're all basically, they will trigger we kind of feel have something that's unique to the player, that's of value to them.
Right.
And there's really acceptable frequency of offer.
Right. So you're from IUGO. Okay, gotcha. Cool. So the way that I generally think about offer timing is basically 4 types. So the first type is just fixed timing, so general, which is like you mentioned starter packs, which is a limited time offer from the beginning. VIP promo, which kind of kicks off at a specific time. Re-engagement promo, if you've lost somebody, then this will just happen. And so this is just fixed timing. The second is based around game events or trigger-based timing. So, I think a really good example of this is in Clash Royale. So every time you go up an arena level, then it's like, hey, you feel good, you've just gotten to the next level, you feel like there's going to be a challenge ahead, and so you give the player an offer because that's when they feel like they're going to need it. So, right? So these are auto-triggered based upon progression, but it could be any type of progression. And then there was also a mention about events, but yes, pre or post in-game event. A good example of this is Legendary. So, when you launch an event, pre or post that, you want to give an offer. And these are what I call game event-based timing, and basically the type of timing is trigger-based. There was also a mention about holidays or special days, calendar timing, so holidays, or because of game achievements. Hey guys, we achieved 1 million users. Here's an offer. This is our 5th anniversary of the game, or other special days. And so there's the third type I define are calendar-based. And then finally, which is per player-based timing, where you would use machine learning to actually deliver ad hoc timing. And so this is, I mentioned in the beginning, where there was a developer that actually studied the average kind of purchase time between purchases, and then based on that, used machine learning to kind of optimize the exact right time to send an offer on a per player basis. But you could do that based on average purchase time, based on a difficulty analysis, right? This player, we believe, is starting to have difficulty in the game, send them an offer. Or just other machine learning patterns which we don't know about, right? But because we've instrumented 50 different signals for the player, that through machine learning, it will tell us, oh, give this player an offer at this time based on these specific events that are tied to some of the signals that you've instrumented. So these are the 4, at least from my perspective, ways of thinking about timing with offers. And then finally, I talked about the offers themselves. And so here, I talked about what constitutes an offer. And in my opinion, and again, please feel free to, I'd love to hear your opinions as well. The way that I break down offers is really around 3 things. Pricing, the amount of discount that you give, and then the type of creatives that you use, right? And so pricing is really about how big of an IAP should we be offering the customer. Should it be $5? Should it be $10? Should it be $1? And the typical strategies for pricing that I've seen in the marketplace is just general discovery, like you just use art, your PM sense, your gamer sense of playing the game. It's like, I think $5 seems to be a good amount for this, or $2 or whatever. And then you just try those different price points, and you would A/B test them and see what happens. The second type, which is popularized by Scopely, is called step up, step down, which is more of a per user based pricing, but you would offer players, you would start them off at, say, $5. They don't convert, you bring it down, $2. You bring it down, $1. They convert, you bring it up, $10. They convert, you bring it up, $20. And then if they don't convert, you bring it back down. So that's called step up, step down. The third type is called, is basically just segment similarity, right? So if you have, based upon the segmentation that we talked about before, if you have your players in different types of segments, then you try to see what is the pricing that is popular amongst the segment that this player is in, and you give them that pricing. And finally, try, which is just sequential experimentation. I think we talked about that. You just try different things and see what works, right? So that is my understanding in terms of pricing. And then in terms of discount, that's a second piece, which is, sometimes players aren't going to convert unless they feel like they're getting good value on the sale or the offer that you're giving them. And so how do we come up with the amount of discount to offer a player? Well, for me, there's 4 different types. One is a scheduled discount, which every month you offer a specific discount, and so people can wait for that discount. And there's different schools of thought on whether this kind of scheduled discount is actually good or bad, right? I mean, The school of thought that says it's bad is that people will learn to wait for that scheduled discount. They won't buy anything until they see that discount that they can expect. And so then the other approach is random. And so you can just randomize the discount that you give players and just offer it at random times. The next is sequential increase, that every, it could be random or on a specific cadence. You just keep increasing the amount of discount that you're offering a player until they convert. And then finally, there's machine learning, so Clash Royale, right? So why do you get a 3x discount and he gets a 5x discount? Well, there's actually machine learning in the background determining why and when you get a 3x versus a 2x versus a 4x versus a 5x.
Two thoughts on the discount. One for the thing you just mentioned. Because we have a highly social game, one thing we've discovered is offering different deals.
Yeah.
It's actually really bad for the community because everybody talks, right? So
Yeah.
you're chatting our games and be like, oh, I have a deal, you have a deal. That can be like problematic, although you still doing it properly. Another thing about discounts that we try to do and find some success in some of our games is actually give people a bonus. And like this weekend rates give you 50% more experience, and that way people aren't actually like hoarding the thing that they can buy at a discount.
Right.
They're more incentivized to just buy the thing during that time.
Right.
So it sort of flips the discount. It ends up being the same thing, but for players they don't sort of think about it as like, okay, I can afford this, buy the thing.
Yeah. I also think it depends on like the player expectation that you've set up. Like with Clash Royale, they mix it up so much where if a player was like, hey, I got a 5x discount, and another player says, I got 2x, then they'll say, well, just wait, and eventually you'll see that, right? And so, like, depending on, I think you can set kind of player expectations for discounts as well. And then creatives is the final part. And so we've talked about for ads, creating psychographic profiles around specific, go ahead.
So on discount, I think depending on the game and depending on what economy you're working with, there's also your content flow. If you know you have a content update going out, particularly if you have a game where you're blowing out older content. So it's the same thing as blowing out the 2015 models, right? And so I think with that it affects the discount as well as you actually go through what typical release is.
Yeah.
What time you do it.
And the one thing I haven't talked about is sort of the economic impact of discounts, which is also very important. I think for like an idle game like yours, you don't have to worry about that too much because those type of games absorb inflation really well. But if you're like Clash Royale or if you're another game and you're giving massive discounts, you might just be pulling forward revenue rather than increasing overall revenue. So that's something else to think about. I haven't addressed it in this, but there's definitely specific types of analysis that you should do to make sure that when you are discounting that you're not totally fucking up your economy. So that's definitely a good point. And then with respect to creatives, this is all about trying to understand what kinds of creatives will actually optimize conversion, right? And sometimes for people in the ad space know pretty well is that sometimes the weirdest crap actually converts the best. You just don't know. And so there should always be sort of this experimentation mentality when it comes to creatives in your game. But you should be thinking about your creatives in your game for your offers and discounts just as much as you're thinking about ad creatives to bring players into the game. And so whether you do the same type of analysis in terms of trying to come up with psychographic profiles and themes, and whether you're employing A/B tests against your creatives or preferably, for those of you who are into multi-arm bandit, that is, in my opinion, the much better approach. I'm actually not a fan of A/B testing, not the application, but the specific approach. And then finally, it's just competitive benchmarking. If there are similar games in the market, you can kind of go out and see what are the creatives that your competitors are using to convert their sales and their offers in their game. And so this is how I basically think about offers. Okay. So that's a lot of what I wanted to talk about. Did I miss anything? So I'm actually, just to give you guys more context, I'm in the process of speccing out basically some features and technology and stuff like that to actually implement this stuff for the new game studio that I'm going to develop. So, for me, this is as much of a open conversation in terms of, from a high level, how am I thinking about sales and merchandising, and what are the kind of tools and services that I'm about to build. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of how I've thought about this and whether I missed anything or not.
What about
Content.
content? And I think that's one of the biggest things is really successful offer should be something it's exclusive, it has to be enticing, right? It
Yeah.
can't just be the same thing that you package with a new name. That's not
Right, and I did mention bundle sales, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I probably should I should have covered bundle sales for sure. And yeah, to your point, also some of the things I didn't talk about that are important are things like price anchoring, right? And so for example, one of the great things about bundle sales is that they are a price anchor against your IAPs, right? And so you can have a very high IAP, but then why do bundle sales convert so well? Because people look at the bundle sale and they feel like they're getting a tremendous deal. And then one level below that, and why subscriptions are working so well now, is that that's actually a double price anchor, right? So you've got your IAP, then you've got your bundle sale, then you've got your subscriptions. And so it's kind of a form of price discrimination, but definitely something I should have talked about.
But I just think in the example of Clash Royale,
Yeah.
the reason those bundles work so well is as soon as you get to a new league, now get a whole group of new cards that are now
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Players want those that new content as soon as it becomes available so they can stay competitive.
Right.
If those bundles were just, here's a bit of hard currency and soft currency
Yeah.
at a discount,
Yeah.
that would be enticing.
Yeah, so I think if I were to give this presentation again, I should definitely cover that, what you're calling content, but basically that value exchange part, right? Yeah, for sure. And you had a comment, sorry?
Yeah, it's about regional pricing.
Sorry?
Regional pricing?
Regional pricing. Yeah, you should do it. I don't have a great approach for that. Besides, the one way to approach that is to treat each geo as a different segment. But yeah, I don't have a great approach for that. I know there are some services out there that actually do dynamic pricing based on different geos, and that seems to provide some incremental benefit. But yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, we price significantly differently.
Right.
And something content side we do that drives a lot of revenue is limited time event-based content.
Yeah.
Being more mature, if you want to get to offer new levels or entertainments whole new avatars that you can get, for example. But they get those by playing the game during the group and the game thing. So that drives a lot of our all the things you talk about, like personas or is how you offer specific offers. They're all driven around these limited time content. Really the game working towards that. There's leaderboards and it sort of drives the entire piece of monetization that you kind of touched on. And
Yeah.
I think that's because it's a more mature game audience sort of thing. But it's something that we found if we prioritize say ratchet promos in a new game before we knew what our content structure would look like in the long-term economy.
Yeah.
And have enticing offer for players. And so yes, one thing we've really found is how you focus on keeping people engaged over long periods of time. And that really drives the value proposition for the player to what you're offering.
Yeah. And please.
I think it's really important also to work on both the supply side and the demand side simultaneously.
Yeah.
That's a piece that you can throw your economy out of whack if you're not careful. You're going to give them more. You give them more value in terms of on the demand side. You got to give them something to spend on, right? And I'm also trying to create feeding frenzies, particularly if Iron Source is running an advertising sale on a particular weekend, and you want to match that up with things for them to spend that on. Those types of things where you're trying to create and combine that with an event.
Yeah.
And trying to create kind of a frenzy.
Yeah. No, I actually think the point you make is a very critical point, which I totally missed, right? And for those of you who are familiar with, for example, Game of War, they would actually have, so the other thing that I missed is just how you tie events to sales. And so in Game of War, they have weekly troop build events, and they have weekend battle events, right? And so basically what they're doing is they're designing a system and they're designing events around to drive sales around sources and sinks. And so you're trying to drive that. You're trying to sink currency so that it drives the demand to buy currency, for example. But yeah, that's a very critical point which should probably be discussed as well. Tim?
Just to backtrack, Tabor, like for really social games, especially based around competition and PvP, players are talking together all the time. So when a certain VIP group gets an offer that's a really good price, everybody wants to get that. I'm just wondering how you've seen that handled in other games in terms of is the player success customer service side.
I mean, I've heard a lot of, I've anecdotally heard about players that get upset about, different segments getting different offers, but at the same time, I don't know, I've done it and it hasn't been a big deal for me, so I don't know. And I mean, if like some of the bigger games will, for the whales, they'll actually give you an ability to buy currency off of the App Store, right? So you can just buy directly and things like that. So I don't know. For me, because I haven't experienced any major negative backlash against that type of thing, it hasn't been a concern for me, but I don't know. Maybe that might get me in trouble in the future. Who knows?
I think that if you do have a VIP system, it's to just be very clear what the VIPs say. Oh, if you are this VIP, which means, you're basically segmenting it instead of doing that.
Don't hide it, embrace it.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to be a VIP.
So why they're not getting this discount on future offers. So then it's something that keeps the
I think another consideration, maybe not offers themselves, but is actually just the measurement of your success afterwards. So to coin a phrase that Kano Apps guys use, talking about lagging metrics, you really want to look at those from a revenue point of view. What's the makeup of your revenue? What's the average transaction value now after these, right? And how can you associate those to the personas or the segmentation?
Right.
And then also the number of transactions as well. Because that's really the key to understanding whether it's working. It's great, you could probably put an offer out there, put a lot of gold into your ecosystem, and you might think that's fantastic, but it may actually not be as conducive on the revenue side of things.
Yeah, right. And so one piece I should probably have talked about are the different types of analysis you can do to try to determine impact on economy and then impact on overall, for example, LTV, right? And so ultimately you're trying to maximize LTV, not just bring revenue forward.
But the different types of offers are going to change the average transaction value.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Also, potentially the number of transactions that actually take place because of that.
Right.
That's actually what you're trying to move those two metrics the most.
Yeah.
Do you guys track your sources safely?
Like slide, for example. Because I have the same error. So I track every source and sync and then try to see what the sale hangover is, or venting game and trying to see if we can lock it down. And then I'm trying to play around with trying to do the sales before or after, even having an event, doing the full day at full price. They're going to do that anyway, and then we do the sale after and try to keep it. Just trying to play around with timing. Because even with timing for a calendar, the social casino, if we did that close the first of the month, we're actually worse off because they already had money for the month. So mid-month was way better target. So it's kind of interesting.
Okay, so I am right out of time, and so in conclusion, again, the context is I'm actually trying to develop this now in terms of the spec for what we're trying to build for my new studio. So I'd love to get more feedback. If you guys have any thoughts, please ping me afterwards. If you disagree with anything I've talked about, or if there's something I totally missed, please let me know. And I've already, kind of have more and more thinking based on the conversation we've had. And if anyone wants to collaborate, hit me up. And that's basically it. Thank you very much.